Good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of the National Catholic Educational Association, thank you for joining us for this professional development opportunity. I am Christy Blewett. I'm honored and excited to be NCEA's facilitator for today's webinar, Beyond the Score, a spoonful of sugar for the musicianship medicine. Before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items to note. First, this session is being recorded and will soon be available on ncea.org through your membership portal for future reference. Next, we welcome your thoughts. Please submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box. Our presenter and I will actively monitor the Q&A box and do our best to respond throughout and definitely before the end of today's session. And finally, stay tuned. Once our presenter has concluded, a link to our online survey, along with instructions on how to obtain a certificate of completion for this webinar, will be shared. So now it is my honor to introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Rudy Marcozzi, an award-winning educator and professor emeritus at Roosevelt University's Chicago College of Performing Arts, is a distinguished leader in church music with extensive experience at the parish, university, and diocesan levels. A board member of the United States Federation of Pueri Cantores, he is also an active member of the National Association of Pastoral Musicians and the Hymn Society. A former editor and contributor to Pastoral Music and Preparing Your Catholic Wedding from Paulist Press. He currently coordinates music ministry at the Shield Catholic Center at Northwestern University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rudy Marcozzi. Thank you so much for being with us today. Dr. Marcozzi, the floor, or should I say the screen, is yours.
Thank you, Christy, and welcome everyone. I think we should start today's session with a prayer. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Jesus Christ, Lord of all learning, you sat in the midst of teachers and doctors, hearing their words and questioning their conclusions. Encourage all of us who teach your people. Help us to understand our place as mentors and figures of authority. May we stand tall as teachers of human dignity and purpose. Give us the grace to fill the emptiness we often experience and the endurance to serve what sometimes seems to be futile. Let us enjoy with you the reward of a person made whole and made wise through your lasting intercession and love. We make this prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So the title of our overall series is Beyond the Score, recognizing that in a church music rehearsal, that there are many other things that are being taught and learned. The first one in any kind of rehearsal is musicianship. And musicianship sometimes gets a bad name and sometimes becomes a souring or an off-putting dimension of rehearsals and musical training in general. So here's why I think that happens. In a perfect world, or ideally, when we have learners that have advanced musicianship skills, it's usually because they were taught at a very young age, and musicianship wasn't separated from their performance instruction, from their private lessons, from their studio lessons. So musicianship, when it's taught this way, or it's an integral part of the music itself. And it moves from sound, ear, the music itself, to sight, to eye, the score, the reading, the technical. And so if you think about it, if you're training musicians who are aspiring to make music, detaching them from that in any way is really, really uninspiring and often a debilitating or a retarding um, input into their training. So from this ideal world, what often happens is that you take piano lessons or you sing in a group, and there's no emphasis put on musicianship. And so then later training has to kind of layer on musicianship over that skill of music making. And it becomes dry, it becomes abstract, and most of all, it becomes unmusical. So before we actually get into how to build in some musicianship training and practice into a rehearsal, I thought we'd take a look at just some basic pedagogical um, principles and best practices in most pedagogy, but especially in musicianship pedagogy. The first one is sort of what I just alluded to be musical, to make everything, to address everything, to address content and process through the music itself rather than separately from it. Then secondly, in any skills learning, whether you're learning to play basketball or whether you're learning to dance, um, if, if you want people to be able to go away from the instruction and practice effectively, you need to break down everything into very small steps, each of which can be assessed and practiced. So that, and that's because learning happens at a very individual syncretic way. And so some people are ready to move on to step 3 right after a very brief exposure to step 2, while other people may still be back on 1, and they need to practice more outside of the instructional or the group environment. Then finally, another one is to go to I jokingly said go to helical, but we want to create um, across the span of a semester or across the span of a liturgical season, we want to create helical presentations. That is, we want to be able to go back to the beginning and and show how it relates to something new that we're teaching or considering. This is very big new idea, especially post-COVID. Harness the power of experience. Experiential learning is hugely effective, and it's proven to be way more effective than more traditional kinds of learning and teaching. Um, you may have heard about flipped classrooms where you start with the homework because you're forced to solve a problem, and then you go back and sort of look at the content. Metaphors and parallels are always great. They validate what you're doing. They they spark curiosity, and they also help some of your colleagues because it allows students to make connections and see that really everything is connected in a real web of learning and teaching. And then finally, if whatever you do in terms of practice or routine, you know that sooner or later you plateau. And so you need to be able to make slight changes in routine and process to keep everyone engaged. So we'll start with rhythm, because rhythm takes us, lets us see some of the concepts that I just spoke about, and it lets us um, realize how powerful uh, the force of rhythm is in a musical situation. So rhythm drives every other dimension of the music. You can't talk about melody without talking about the role of rhythm in a melody. You can't talk about harmony without talking about, without understanding how that there's a harmonic rhythm. Most importantly, rhythm is built into the human operating system. It's it's most natural. Our our biological functions are rhythmic, and it's monomically powerful. So when you rhythmicize something, you are able to memorize it, you're able to absorb it, you're able to deal with it more quickly than if it were not rhythmicized. If you've ever experienced someone reading you a social security number or a phone number, if it's not rhythmicized in some way, it's very hard to remember and recall it. Um, Songs like the alphabet song or putting learning facts into a haiku or a limerick. Those are all indications or all examples of how rhythmicizing helps facilitate learning. So here are our small steps in the breaking things into small steps, going going getting things down to really, really elemental building blocks. Starting with pulse. A pulse is a series of beats with no accent, and then the addition of accent helps us to establish a meter. Now, that's what we know, but that's not necessarily what we need to teach or how we need to teach that or incorporate that into our teaching. Then, once we have those basic ideas taught experientially and involved in the rehearsal process, you simply expand the building blocks by rearranging them. So the notion of pulse and accent, which are very natural, then gets expanded or transposed to things like meter and patterning at subdivision or division levels, or meter and patterning in various styles. So here are the basics, but here's what will draw students into an understanding of them, and make an application of them very, very natural. Pulse is regular equal beats, like your pulse, stop. So there is the first metaphor. Accent is stress, and placement of stress creates different results. Like if I move stress around in a word, if I say my project or project your voice, those differences have come about by moving accent or stress. When I move accent or stress in a certain way, I'll create different metric patterns. So if I put an accent on every fourth beat, so 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, I create threeness or a triple meter. That's analogous to the accent in a waltz choreography, or in a duple example, a duple analog would be in a two-step. If your students are in gym class, or if you're in fitness classes, or if they're swimming, or if they're doing calisthenics and weightlifting, those kinds of rhythmicizations into meters are something that are absolutely essential and helpful in those learning contexts. And so if you can make that connection, that's another great way of using effective pedagogy. Okay, and then finally, from the basics, once the basics are there, those basics could be thought of as a theme. Then the rest of the year, you're going to encounter variations in them. So misplaced stress or misplaced accent in styles like rap or jazz, or the basics at various levels. So what's the triple subdivision of a compound time, etc. So here are just some examples of those kinds of things built into rehearsal, without ever having to say any of that anything except the idea of stress and pulse and accent. When we're warming up, so most choral rehearsals are broadly organized into warm up and then what I would call woodshedding, actually working through new music, learning new music, putting newer pieces together, and then a kind of session or a segment module on polishing on things that have already been woodshedded. The warm up is especially conducive to building in this kind of covert musicianship. So, and we should be warming up more than our voices. We should be warming up our ears. We should be warming up our internal ear, the mind's ear, as well as the external ear by listening to what others are doing and assessing what sounds are happening. So, for example, um, playing or singing and then having people repeat is a way of them making them listen attentively and absorbing things. It's sort of it's basically dictation without the paper, or a dictation in the sort of language sense of dictation. So I picked a peck of pickled peppers. When you don't need to talk about the fact where the accent is or what meter that might be. You just need to get them to understand that the differences in what they're hearing and the differences that they can create in a given sound are due to the fact of where the accents and stresses are and aren't. Chant is a great example of if you're only listening and you're only thinking about stress and accent, the chant is natural and flowing. Um, this looks on the page like it's changing meter frequently. In fact, there are no measure that stays the same contiguously. But if you think about where the accents are and the students understand, like you just talked about, stress in syllables and in words, the accents help the text and really eliminate the need for technically dissecting the notation. Another powerful way of helping rhythmic understanding and building in rhythmic fluency is a training wheel that an author, Tim Kaziz, calls speech cues. So these are really easy examples. But so subdivision into two um, is associated with baker. Subdivision into four might be peanut butter. Subdivision, and then asymmetric patterns at the subdivision level can be associated with words. So you have baker, 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 peanut butter, peanut butter, peanut butter, grasshopper. So ultimately, and with the benefit of multiple years in a choral group or multiple years in a curriculum, you do get to layer on the technical jargon and the sort of technical explanations. But if you start there, that you're prone to losing people and you're prone to separating all that from the music. In these kinds of processes, the music is still, the sound is still the primary mode of presentation, and you're less likely to lose people, and especially conversely, you're more likely to engage them and keep them interested in learning about more or more deeply. So here, so with that with that rhythm, which I say drives everything, then you move out from that to address the other elements, melody especially, and then again, later on in a curriculum or in a season or basically in a class, in a semester, you move on to melodic or harmonic concepts. We're talking here in this segment, I'm talking about mostly music with some kind of pitch centricity, usually tonal, but often in liturgical music, modal as well. But they each have a center, and so they each have things that people can relate to based on their experience of hearing and based on their experience of singing. Scale steps, scalar motion is the basis of most vocal melodies. If you want someone to experience that, just ask them to hum something, make something up, improvise, and you'll find that mostly they're using scale-wise motion. Some scale steps have tension, some scale steps have stability. You can demonstrate that, or you can relate that, or you can introduce that to them by playing a phrase, singing a phrase, stopping on the penultimate cadential note, maybe it's the second scale degree or the seventh scale degree, and ask them to tell you, predict what's coming next. They'll be able to do that naturally. Then you can also do the kind of mapping that we saw with the speech syllables. Triadic skips in many skips in tonal music are triadic. Do you have a known piece, a sound that illustrates that? Yeah. How about the opening of Jesus Christ is risen today as an arpeggiated, harmonically controlled skip. Skips to tendency tones don't need to, if you skip to a tendency tone, if you skip to the leading tone, the seventh scale degree, or if you skip down to the supertonic, the second scale degree, in a cadence. If you don't need to measure that interval and think about that interval and process that interval. You can process it by naturally understanding the tendency. And so you hear for example, you hear the supertonic relative to the tonic that's coming after it, not so you're actually hearing across the interval and processing across the interval. And then finally, this is just basic cognitive science and cognitive pedagogy. We human beings like to chunk things. We grasp things better when they're in patterns, when they're in bigger chunks. And so we don't sing note to note. We sing in subphrases or small sequential patterns. We'll look at some, when we get in a few slides, we'll look at some actual examples of these ideas. So here's building musicianship into warm-ups. First of all, as I said before, we're not just warming up the voice. And in fact, if your rehearsal is late at night after you've been talking all day, your basic voice is warmed up, you may have to warm up your placement and focus and things like that. But the muscle of the voice is actually already warmed up, probably. But beyond the voice, warm up your ears, warm up your mind. You can do. It's easy to. So rather than just okay, we're going to do scales, and then we're going to do arpeggios, and then we're going to do combinations, or we're going to do diction exercises. Whatever we're going to do it with the idea that you're going to warm up and you're going to teach more and you're going to emphasize some musicianship without ever having to talk about it. So for example, if you sing a scale, you could sing a scale canonically in multiple parts by letting the follower voices start at the interval of a third. You can do it in 2 parts, men and women. You can do it in 4 parts, SATB. You can do it in 3 parts. So you're warming up the pitch, the memory of pitch relationships. You're warming up the voice as the range increases, but you're also warming up your ear because you're now singing in canon. This is also after people are accustomed to the idea that you're warming up more than one thing, you can build in variations so that you're not always doing the same thing all the time, because that tends to lead to sort of rote and maybe mindless rote repetition. And so you're actually defeating the purpose of a warm-up if you're not thinking about keeping things from plateauing or becoming pure rote. So those other suggestions of ways to use it, I already talked about. Performing in canon and the various entrance lengths. You can add a second voice to that pattern in longer notes, and then you can re-improvise again, or you can just make a total mashup of any 2 things or any 3 things. But the point is, you're building musicianship without ever having to talk about it, without ever having to, in a way that's musically interesting and musically engaging. This is sort of a rabbit hole, but I didn't feel like it would be fair to talk about rehearsals and musicianship without talking about mnemonic melodic systems. So most people who study fixed dose solfege and who are proficient at it usually come from places where that was built into their studio training, as I said way at the beginning. So young learners tend to do very well with fixed dose systems. Not so well, not so with older learners. I taught collegiate musicianship for many years, and I know that students thought I was being funny or I was joking with them, but when they were 21 years old and they were trying to learn fixed do, I actually told them, you're too old to do this. So older learners without that built-in experience tend to benefit more from movable do. If you want to avoid the 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 confusion or inconsistency of fixed do or movable do, you could go to numbers. But here's the truth, that any system will work if you believe in it and if you're consistent about using it. And then just finally, a couple of just other things. Students often will fight this because it seems like it's taking them away from the music, especially students who are proficient performers who never thought about any of this. And you may have many of them. Singers especially, you can get a long way in terms of being a proficient singer without ever having to look at written music. Drummers, same way. If you're a proficient performer and the joy of your music making is in making the music, gluing this seemingly artificial system on can become tedious. And then finally, if somebody has something that's working, let them alone, and use the system that that's working for you and the class, but recognize that some individuals may already be doing it better a different way. And that slide is sort of a footnote, just because I didn't feel like I could leave the elephant in the room without talking about it. It's a whole webinar in itself. It's probably a whole series of webinars in itself. And then the really intensive part of most rehearsals is when you're actually learning new pieces and working to make sure that all the parts are working, and that the parts are working with each other. And that's a part where uh, rote teaching and mindless rote repetition can creep in. It's also a part where if you have a group where you have 3 or 4 individuals who can read and like to read and are facile learners and readers, and you have 5 or 6 others that have no reading skills or little reading background, that can be very, very tedious and frustrating for both groups if you go too fast or go too slow, or aren't engaging people all the time in some way. So everybody can be involved when you're working with one part. And here are some ways that you can do that. If you're working with one part, you can ask everybody, if you're going to work through the alto part, for example, you could ask the other 3, or how many ever other parts you have, you could ask those other 3 to sing with the part that you're rehearsing or segregating, either aloud or silently. It provides reading practice. It can provide, if you're rehearsing an alto part and you ask all the guys to sing with you, or aloud or silently, they're reading in a different clef than they're used to. They're listening in a different register than they're used to, and they are engaged, even if they can already read and sing their own part. Great practice that sort of has um, way great benefits way down the road. It sort of just builds itself into your musicianship. If you're rehearsing the alto part, ask the sopranos to imagine their part against the alto part while in their mind's ear. So this idea of audiation, the inner ear, the mind's ear, the more that develops, the more solid a musician you become. And then the another way, or another area where we want to think about avoiding this mindless repetition, is to vary the use of the piano when teaching parts, when teaching new material, or when sight reading. So the piano is, Leonard Bernstein said that when he was learning and teaching, that all his life the piano was his best friend, but he was very careful to let his students know that it could be a false friend as well. So the piano is this great tool. It's a visual representation of the sound. It it it's really, it's, if you agree that 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 the tuning is in, that it's in tune, um, it's just a great tool to help learning. However, it can also become a crutch, and it can also not it can also prevent independence. So you can play a part while someone is singing it. You can play it and ask them not to sing, but rather listen to it. You can then play it back and ask them if they think they were accurate. That's the check part or the assessing part. You can flip that on it. You can invert that process. You can sing it. They can sing it. You can play it. Then you ask them to compare and check. Um, this is a great one. This gives you listening practice and inner ear practice and ensemble practice. If you have the part, um, play the first phrase on the piano, ask them to sing the next one, play the next phrase, ask them to sing the third one. So they're listening, they're flipping out of modalities. They're flipping from consumer to producer and back to consumer again, and all kinds of inner ear and cognitive processes are being stretched and tested and reinforced. And I guess the summative point is use the piano to check sound, not create it, not as a learning crutch, not depending on it to create the sound itself. And then here is just hugely important, probably maybe the most important thing to think about when we're rehearsing in terms of musicianship and efficiency. Practice doesn't make perfect, contrary to what you may have been told. Practice makes permanent. If you're practicing wrong notes, if you're practicing bad intonation, if you're practicing with um, sloppy rhythm, you'll get really good at practicing at being sloppy or at being out of tune. So it's really important to avoid mindless repetition. Every time you repeat something, if you ask the choir to repeat something, I think you ought to tell them why. So we're going to do this again because individual practice, if you allow unassessed repetition to happen, you're going to create, you run the risk of creating a bad habit or a habituated problem, right? And this is really important to understand, that the way to avoid that is to be sure that you're checking for accuracy. And usually people first starting out don't know if they're correct or incorrect. They may need a competent partner or a section leader to be sure they're correct. And I found this with practice tracks especially. We send a practice track out and then it comes back and the student sings and it's not correct, or it's inaccurate, it's sloppy, it's not precise. And you say, did you listen to the track? Oh yeah, I listened to it. And then what did you do? And then, like, you can't just give them practice tracks. I think you need to tell them how to use the practice tracks, and be sure that there's a way that they're assessing their learning. And oftentimes, again, that might be being able to play it back on the piano. It might be with a partner, or in a sort of office hour or section situation. And then finally, just a sort of stepping back to, when we do this all the time, I think we take for granted that, when we've practiced it for many hours and days and months and years, and I think that can sometimes lead us to forget that really this is a hard job. The reading of notation, reading notation, putting it together with sound. It involves many modalities functioning at the same time. And I think if we just need to step back and realize that it's hard, which can let us be more patient and more systematic about helping people. Um, so so music existed first as sound, right? Um, and then along comes the need to move it to a different part, to move it from northern Italy to southern Italy, or someone takes a trip to Sicily and then goes back up to Rome and says, they have this great dance down in Sicily, and he sings or she sings how she sings what the people were dancing to. Sooner or later, as the oral so it starts as an oral tradition, ORAL, and then because of transmission and for teaching purposes, it gets written down, and then there becomes this written tradition of notation. But the notation is inherently unable or insufficient. It can't ever capture everything. And as composers try to capture more and more of what they're hearing and what they're intending, the more complex the notation becomes. That's just if you're dealing with pitch and rhythm on a violin. If you add a vocal part and then you add multiple vocal parts in a choral situation, you've not, the complexity doesn't occur additively. Like, it's not just three different things, it's 3 times 3 times 3. It's exponentially more complex the more modalities, more learning and processing modalities that are involved. So there's the text of the lyrics. There's the text that says go slower or go faster. There's the text that says go back to the beginning. There's the musical notation, which is in itself is complex, and then there are symbols like what is the sign, the little circle with the crosses? What is that? What does that mean? So I've often found, especially with mixed groups of trained and amateur people, that we take DS al DS al coda or coda to the end. We take all that for granted, but part of reading music for the beginner is also part of reading that other text and understanding what that other text is. And then finally, if you have students and choristers with learning disabilities, they have to tell you, but you can usually see it as well. But a person with learning disability, like for example, a person that's even mildly dyslexic, reading music is an absolute nightmare for that person. Um, and if they have mild dyslexia and ADD or ADHD, they really need your patience. Um, and it's doable, but they're going to be frustrated because they can't move in the ways and the tempo that their peers around them can. I know that's a lot. And it's a lot of just what I found by dealing with mostly amateur choirs for many years, even while I was um, training professional musicians in collegiate musicianship classes. Um, and I think we are at the point where we could entertain questions. Christy, am I close to being on time?
Perfectly on time, Dr. Marcozzi. Thank you. Thank you for asking. It looks like I'll give a moment for our attendees to ask some questions. I think you really touched on a lot of key concepts and thoroughly. And I thank you for that on behalf of everyone here today. This was a wonderful inspiration, right, for musicianship to come into just music education, make it inspiring, engaging, and was fascinated with something that doesn't even have to be talked about. You use your voice for other things, right? It's for the making of the music, however that is. So thank you. Your passion for music as a tool for spiritual growth can remind us that every note we teach is an act of worship. So grateful for your time and your wisdom and your dedication. Thank you. Thank you for that. It was a privilege to learn from you. And finally, the simple reminder that practice makes permanent. So good. We do have a question here from Kathleen, if you wouldn't mind. Could you talk more about Pueri Cantores for us, please?
I think, yes. Pueri Cantores is an international federation that is whose mission it is to foster choral liturgical singing. The literal translation is young singers, and so in the United States, Pueri Cantores functions across the country with through choral festivals in which choirs come together to sing for liturgy. Um, they come together usually in bigger spaces, so it's the experience of many singers all at once in these very acoustically flattering spaces. They they learn a lot about what you just talked about, Christy, which is that singing really is for the honor and glory of God, and that music is a gift from God, and this is a way that they learn to that they experience a really wonderful and different from week to week choir a choral experience, and it engages younger singers to keep developing as singers and as and to keep using their singing to enrich their faith and to grow their faith.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We also have a request from Sharon. If you wouldn't mind just going back to the first two slides briefly. There were some things they were hoping to see.
That's the first one. Christy, we do put these slides somewhere, or we can put them.
That's correct. They will be sent out to participants with the recording of this webinar.
There's one, and here's two.
Beautiful.
Specific questions or?
Yeah, not yet. Please feel free to put them in the chat if you'd like to, or the Q&A, if you'd like to have a specific question about slide 1 or slide 2. Be happy to go through that.
There's one again.
Thank you. Great. Maybe while they're typing, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping here. If there are any other questions, now's your chance to pick his brain while we have him here. Dr. Marcozzi, thank you. To our online attendees, thank you for being here and for your thoughtful engagement. NCEA values your input as we work to continuously improve our content and services for you, our members. Please take a moment to complete the short survey that was just entered into the chat. If you'd like a certificate of attendance, please include your name and email at the end of the survey. Certificates are sent automatically, so be sure to check your spam folder if you don't receive it within a few moments. And I did, let's see. Oh, the questions are coming in, sir. Regarding practice tracks, is the person's interaction with the track the primary cause for presenting it incorrectly? Or is there a suggestion of how to create a practice track that would better help that person present with the desired outcome?
So I think many of the problems, or most of the problems that I've experienced with them, are because I mean, if you go online, there's a practice track for this. Frequently, that's just like the alto part played by itself. But if you don't tell them what to do with it, like so, I'll when I put practice tracks together, when my assistants put practice tracks together, it's like, okay, listen to this, and then we'll play it, and then like the practice track will include verbal instruction. So listen to this, sing it back, listen to it again. How close or how right do you think you are? Can you then sing it without looking at the notation? Can you look at the notation and imagine it? So it's all those things that we talked about as processing in the live woodshedding session, but it's it's I think the problem comes from lack of directions, I guess. Does that sort of answer the question?
That's a great start. Please, if you need further clarification, go ahead and throw that in the Q&A box. But thank you. Thank you. We also have a question here from Lillian. Do you have any specific advice for our students with disabilities?
A couple. First of all, most times, so I was our when I taught collegiate theory, I was our disabilities representative in the disabilities office. A lot of the accommodations that offices provide on a standard basis include taking more time on tests. That's not really relevant in a rehearsal, but as I said before, they can't. Often the issue is that they can't keep up at the group's tempo, and so uh, section separate sectionals for them or separate one-on-ones with them um, are the main suggestions that I would have, the main ones that seem to be the most helpful to them. It also depends on the disability. Um, Visual disabilities, as I said, um, that give students problems in like reading class or spelling class. Those, because of the complexity of the visual stimuli in a musical score, those just are like way off to the power of 100, and that's just that's individual work to see. Sometimes things can um, sometimes one or more element may cause more or less problems if you can identify them. The other thing is that, at a slower tempo or in smaller segments, there's nothing that helps in my experience, there's nothing that really helps um, students with disabilities than to succeed at something. And that's really true of any kind of learning. Like if you want to motivate people to continue and improve, give them some small success. Um, so I guess the 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 fundamental answer to the question is it's a one-on-one thing.
Great. Yeah, it's so true. Thank you. I think there was a question and then a fun little reminder, if you wouldn't mind, reviewing the joke or the pun intended there with go to helical.
So if you know what a helix is, um, helical is the adjective of helix. The helix that most of us know or come from eighth grade biology class. It's the picture of the DNA molecule, which is it's a it's basically a stretched out slinky, and so by helical, and it's as it's stretched out, it's also getting the conic. It's also the diameter of the top is also getting bigger, and so the point is. At the bottom of the helix are those building blocks. And then as you move up the helix, um, you always want to connect the higher layers of that back down through into the building blocks. It's basically the idea. It's, if you want to think of it in a different image, it's a it's a building with stories, um, and the foundation is the ground, and you can't build you build more learning by building onto and using the elements of the ground floor, except that that's a very linear two-dimension image. The helix really is, I think, more suggestive of learning and curriculum.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's fun to pick a maestro's brain. Our questions continue to come in. Hi, Dr. Marcozzi. This is from Peter. What kind of tips, tricks, and suggestions do you have in helping students transition from fixed do to alpha note reading? I used fixed do with my band students in a pseudo Suzuki approach.
Then I have to ask the question first about what the second element that he asks about actually is, because I may be familiar with it. We may be calling something uh, the same thing, two different names. So from fixed do to
Alpha note reading.
oh, just like reading C, D, F sharp, E.
Probably, but Peter, feel free to throw it in the Q&A box if we're misunderstanding. Helping students transition from a fixed do to alpha note reading. Let's see, maybe we can, yes, CD, etc. That's correct. You were right on.
So with all those mnemonic systems, you're basically mapping one thing onto another. And in some of them, you're mapping through multiple layers of maps. And so I think to get from fixed do to, here's another part of the rabbit hole. Some fixed do systems say that C is do and C sharp is D and uh, D is re and D sharp is re. Other systems call C and C sharp do. You just have to know what that is. And so I maybe an intermediate step would be to make sure that I imagine if you're calling C and C sharp the same thing, then getting to the alpha notation is going to be confusing. And so I might start with just some work with them understanding that even though they were calling two different things the same thing, and that now we're not going to do that. We're not going to be able to do that. And so you might intermediate in an intermediate way is to add, if they're really fluent with fixed do, it's going to bother them to call C sharp D. But again, that's it's a the difficulty I think I would guess would be coming from the mapping where the mapping in alpha notation is always 1-to-1, but the mapping in fixed do may have been 2-to-1 or many to one. So I might introduce the idea of expanding the fixed do system a little bit to accommodate differences. But that may be maybe not what the problems that he's encountering altogether. I have found that if people are really proficient in fixed do, I just leave them alone because they can do all of the things that I'm asking them to do. But conversely, if it's been, I had a young woman from Iceland who she would she could not sing. So she was taught that C and C sharp were do, but she couldn't make the difference in the sound consistently. And so sharps would be flats and naturals would be crazy. So it's a matter of I think recognizing where the mapping difficulties may be occurring and doing some kind of transitional systematic work to bridge the differences.
Thank you. Thank you. And Peter, feel free to ask any follow-up questions if you have any, or continue that conversation. Thank you. Okay, next question is from Eileen. Do you have any tips on managing kids who have difficulty matching pitch? I have a few that love singing but are way off key. Or other sources you could recommend to address. Their ear skill doesn't seem to match their enthusiasm to make music.
So a couple of things. First of all, it's rare that it can't be improved. Secondly, they need probably a lot of work with, and again, without making them totally dependent on something, but they need to practice the task of matching, and they need someone there with them telling them when or not they're matching. A couple of things make it more difficult. If they're working out of their register, their natural register, then matching becomes, and they're not adept at matching yet, then matching becomes more difficult. And if they're working with lots of things at once, then matching is very difficult. So I would say baby steps, and for sure, um, with that, with all the things we talked about earlier in terms of taking the time to be able to know if you're right or wrong. Though people who aren't matching pitch don't know that they're not matching it, so they need to hear an oral or a sonic stimulus, and and they need to then try to match it, and they need to know, they need a third, they need an outside source to tell them whether they're matching or not and how they're not matching. When you start there, you'll find some place where they're pretty consistent at matching, and then you work out from there. But again, that's a long process. It's idiosyncratic, and it's very individual. I've also found sometimes that speech therapists have some tricks that they work with, um, in terms of matching and interaudiation.
It's a great pro tip. Thank you. Um, all right. It looks like some of the teachers with us today are on an exchange program. And so they wanted a repeat of some things a little bit slower and broken down. So not only have I shared Dr. Marcozzi's email in the chat, if you have any further questions and you'd like to pick his brain a little bit, feel free to use that email. Thank you for sharing that with us. And also you will be emailed a recording that you can watch on demand at your leisure. So thank you for sharing that, and thanks for being here with us. Oh, Sharon said I find that a big red target works for her. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Okay. Another question from Mary. Do you have any tips for changing voices? I have some singers who have limited range due to changing voices.
I don't have tons of tips for that because I've quite honestly not ever worked with it in that situation. I've done a lot of adult volunteer choirs and in collegiate singers, so I don't have tips for changing. I know if you I know obviously because of the mission of Pueri Cantores, um, the festival conductors are crazily adept at and experienced with changing voices. So we might get your question out to them, and I'll think about a couple of textbook or journal articles that might help you with that too. If you can forward me that question, I'll try to take care of that in a little more helpful way.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Please feel free to use that email that's in the chat shared out with you. And thank you for that offer to follow up, Dr. Marcozzi.
And I just, while I'm thinking about it, I want to go back to the pitch matching. sometimes it's a physio physiognomic vocal problem. And you can diagnose that, test it, and develop it by a couple of things. One is with humming rather than singing. Sometimes you'll get quicker matching with humming. And if that doesn't work, if you get a slide whistle so that the sound is being made outside of their inner ear, and then the that often is a solution to or a diagnosing and a solution to the fact that when we sing, we don't really hear what we sound like, right? And so that might be as extensive as it usually we're just talking about the timbre or the maybe the pitch, but but getting the sound outside and then acts and having them match with something that doesn't depend on them physically, that's outside of their physical vocal apparatus. I have a colleague who it's an advanced intonation class, but he uses that with singers and instrumentalists alike, just using a slide whistle to get the sound out of your head, literally.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you for that follow-up. My goodness, I invite all of our participants, one last call for any questions you'd like to add into the chat. Otherwise, Dr. Marcozzi, we just have some gratitude saying thank you for today from our participants. Thank you for answering questions and blessings to you and your work as you continue.
Thank you, and thank everyone for being with us.
Beautiful. Yep, that
Once, keep on singing and keep the faith.
Very good. May we all continue as that gratitude continues to pour in. This was wonderful. To build up the kingdom of God by inspiring hearts and minds through the gift of music. God bless you all, and may your work continue to bring joy and harmony to our Catholic schools. Thank you, Dr. Marcozzi, so much. It was an honor today, and thank you to everyone who joined us. Goodbye, and God bless.